The old man arrived on foot, which was itself a kind of sermon. He came up the main road into Iron Ridge with a small retinue, 2 junior readers in pale robes, a censer-bearer, a boy with a rolled banner, and the town turned out to watch the way towns always watch something they cannot yet name as threat or gift. I was standing at the workshop door when he entered the square. I had seen his name in the documents, Seo-rin's contacts sent ahead, Myeong Daon, High Reader of the Mandate, Hierophant of the Order of the Sacred Disc, the highest doctrinal authority in the realm, outside the capital itself. He was older than I had imagined, gray at the temples and gray in the beard, the kind of gray that comes from decades of early rising and cold water and the specific exhaustion of a man who has been performing certainty for a very long time. He wore the deep indigo of the high readers, embroidered at the cuffs with the old disc and ray pattern. He walked without a staff, and he walked well, and he stood in the center of the square and looked at Iron Ridge the way a physician looks at a patient whose symptoms he already understands. "So this is Iron Ridge," he said. His voice carried without effort the voice of a man who had addressed crowds in open air for 40 years. The town that has decided it no longer needs heaven to tell it what is true. He let that sit for a moment. Then he looked at the people gathered in the mud around him, the older ones, the ones who remembered the veil at its full brightness, the ones who still woke at dawn with the old prayers on their lips, and he said, quietly, "Kneel, those of you who still remember whose light kept you alive. I have come a long road to see the heresy with my own eyes." The old ones knelt. I watched it happen without surprise and without contempt. It was not weakness. It was 40 years of habit and genuine love for something that had once been real. The young ones, the apprentices, the gauge readers, the furnace tenders, the children who had grown up measuring things, looked past him toward the workshop roof lines and did not kneel. That gap, that silence between the two groups was the whole problem laid out in a single moment. I was still taking the measure of him when I heard Eun-ha's breath go out. She had come up beside me without my noticing, and her hands had gone completely still. The small habitual movements she was always making, the finger tracing of ratios and curves against her palm, all of it arrested. She was looking at Myeong Daon the way you look at something you thought you had finished grieving. "High Reader," she said, "you're grayer." He found her in the crowd. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, but the adjustment a man makes when a fact he had accepted turns out to be wrong. "And you are alive," he said. "The road did not take you after all. They told me you had died raving in a ditch, speaking in numbers no one could follow. I had a right said for your soul." A pause. "It seems I wasted it." Eun-ha said nothing. Her hands stayed still. He turned back to the square, and his voice shifted into the register of formal charge, not anger, something more considered than anger. "Your lathes, your furnaces, trinkets, I do not care for trinkets. This is my charge. You have taught the people that a scratch on a brass rule can tell them what is true, that a peasant with a gauge may know a thing for himself, without heaven, without the mandate, without me. That is the oldest heresy there is, and I will name it before every town you have poisoned with it." Seo-rin had moved to my shoulder. She said it quietly, for me alone. "He's not here to break the works, he's here to break the idea, and the idea is the only thing we can't reforge if it's lost." She was right. I had been watching the wrong threat. A man who came to smash lathes was a man I could answer with more lathes. A man who came to tell people that the act of measuring for themselves was damnation. That was a different problem entirely. The Hierophant raised his hands then, and his censer-bearer stepped forward, and the ritual began. I had seen the mandate readings before, in the early months, when the veil still had some light left in it, the traced sign, the spoken words, the censer-smoke that was supposed to spiral upward in a specific pattern, the reading disc that was supposed to glow. The old ones in the crowd leaned forward. Even some of the young ones went quiet. The smoke came out flat. It spread sideways in the cold air and dissipated without form. The disc stayed dark. The silence lasted exactly 1 heartbeat too long. I saw it, the instant of naked terror on his face, the face beneath the office. a man standing in front of a crowd with nothing in his hands. Then the mask came back, smooth and practiced and very fast. The signs are clouded by the heresy in this place, he said. That is all. The fault is in the air you have fouled, not in the mandate. He believed it, or he had said it so many times, that the difference between believing and saying had ceased to matter. I could not tell which, and I was not sure it changed anything. He looked at me then, directly, and I understood that the performance had been partly for my benefit, that he had wanted me to see both the failure and the recovery, to understand that he had survived failures before and would name them something else and keep walking. It was in its way a kind of professional communication. I respected the craft of it, even as I recognized what it was. "Hi, reader," I said, "I don't own the truth. That's the whole difference between your way and mine." I picked up the gauge block from the bench beside the door, one of the rungs set from EP40's finishing work, 100mm reference, flat to within fractions of a hair's breadth. "This block is one length," I said. "It says the same length to me, to you, to a blind man, to that orphan girl over there, and any of you can check it and catch me if I lie. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to measure it yourself. A truth you have to take on someone's word is just power wearing a robe. A truth anyone can check belongs to everyone." I stepped back from the door. "Come inside. Let me show you a thing your smoke can't do anymore." The metrology room was lit by oil lamps and the cold gray light from the north-facing window. The surface plate sat on its stone mounting. The rung gauge blocks were racked in their case, and Cho Yeong was at the bench, because Cho Yeong was always at the bench now, the orphan master who had come to us unable to read a character and had taught herself optical metrology by the same stubbornness she applied to everything else. She did not stand when the hierophant entered. She looked up, assessed him, and looked back at the gauge block she was demonstrating to two apprentices. The light interference bands, those thin colored fringes that appear between two rung optical flats when they are held to a lamp, shimmered faintly across the glass surface. "The bands tell you the gap, High Reader," she said, without particular ceremony. "Count them and you know it finer than a hair. I can't read the heavens, but I can read this, and so can you, once someone shows you how. That's the part one like best, that I can show you. Nobody ever has to just take my word." Seo-rin was standing at the far side of the bench. She set a gauge block in front of the hierophant with the flat economy of someone who has done this 10,000 times. "Measure it yourself," she said. "I'll wait. Everyone here learned to. That's the only secret we have." Myeong Daon looked at the block. He looked at the interference fringes. He looked at Cho Yeong, a girl of perhaps 15, cast out, unlettered in the classical sense, demonstrating a technique that could resolve gaps smaller than any instrument his order had ever possessed. Something moved behind his eyes that was not contempt and was not conversion. It was the look of a man taking an accurate inventory of a threat. He did not pick up the block. Seo-rin watched him not pick it up, and her voice went very level. "You want to talk to me about truth, High Reader? My family knelt to the temple's truth for 9 generations. It told us our blood was holy and our word was law. And when the light that was supposed to prove it guttered out, your order let my house burn rather than admit the proof had failed." She was not performing. There was no heat in it, which made it worse to hear. "You didn't lose the truth," she said. "You never had it. You had power, and you called it truth, and you punished anyone who could tell the difference. A gauge block cannot lie to me. After your temple, I find that the most sacred thing I have ever held." The room was quiet. The lamp flame moved in a small draft from the door. Eun-ha had been standing in the corner, and now she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it had the quality of something that has been held in for a long time, and is now simply being stated, without drama, because the time for drama passed years ago. "You cast me out for the same numbers I'm using now, Daon. My figures stopped matching the heavens, and I told you why. The heavens were going quiet. The mandate was dying, and the mathematics could see it before the priests could feel it. I wasn't a heretic. I was an instrument. You broke the instrument because you couldn't bear what it read." The mask came off, not dramatically. It simply was no longer there. What was underneath was not a villain's face, it was an old man's face, hollowed out, the face of someone who has been carrying a knowledge he had no way to set down. I have traced the sign every dawn for 40 years since, he said. His voice had lost its carrying quality. It was just a voice now, in a small room. And every dawn the smoke spreads flat, and the disk stays dark, and I tell the people the air is fouled. You were the first reading I could not bear, Eun-ha. You will not be the last. I know what is happening. I have known longer than any of you. I simply have nothing to be, if it is true. Nobody spoke. Cho Yeong looked at the interference fringes. The lamp burned. He recovered by the time we reached the square again. The mask was back, and it fit better in open air. You have built a clever lie, engineer, and I cannot break it here. He said it without rancor, the way you acknowledge a good move in a game. So I will go where you have sent your teachers and your toolkits and your grade books, and I will stand in those squares and ask the people one question. Who told you that you were allowed to know? We shall see how many of your daughter towns still want your truth when the temple names it damnation. He turned to Seo-rin then, and the warmth that came into his voice was the most frightening thing I had heard all day. Not false exactly, but practiced until it had the same effect as genuine. As for you, child of a good house, the temple is not only a sword. Come back, and your blood is holy again, your house restored, your name unburned. The court will even put it in writing. You have until I leave this province to remember what you are. He left with his retinue. The banner boy rolled the banner. The censer bearer carried the dead censer. The old ones in the square rose slowly from the mud and did not meet anyone's eyes. We stood in the workshop afterward, the four of us, and did not speak for a while. It was Eun-ha who broke it. He is not wrong that the people will listen. I gave 40 years of my life to that voice before it broke me. It is a very old habit, being told what is true, harder to unlearn than any sum. I had been thinking about the daughter towns, the 7 settlements where we had sent teachers and gauge sets, and the simplified metrology workbooks Seo-rin had spent the winter writing. The Hierophant would reach them before we could. He would stand in their squares with that carrying voice and ask his question, and some of them would answer it the way the old ones in our square had answered it today, because 40 years of habit does not dissolve in one season of good measurements. Then we don't outshout him, I said. We do the one thing his way can't. We teach people to check for themselves, and we trust them to. Every child in every daughter town who learns to read a gauge is one more person he can't frighten. It's slower than a cannon. I looked at the engine drawings pinned to the wall, the full tolerance set, the work of 4 seasons, finally buildable. But it's the only wall that holds without us standing on it. Seo-rin was looking at the drawings too. She had not spoken since the square. I did not ask her about the Hierophant's offer, because there was no way to ask it that was not also a demand, and it was not mine to demand. She would answer it in her own time, in her own way, and whatever she chose would be hers. The engine drawings said we could build the heart now. The tolerances were there, the castings were within reach, the precision we had spent 4 seasons earning was sufficient. I looked at the drawings, and I looked at the empty square through the workshop door, and I thought, we can build the heart now. The question the temple just asked is whether anyone will let us use it. And the question I could not ask Seo-rin out loud was which way she would answer hers.